Welcome to Faces Friday. I'm Lynn Sherritt. Thanks so much for joining me. We're continuing the conversation with my Clarity Collaborative members across the globe, and particularly Noel Henry, as he speaks with Karen Cronin about the role of the instructional coach. In the Diocese of Wollongong, the instructional coach or knowledgeable other has made a huge difference to their amazing results. They've looked very carefully at the role, the responsibilities, and how they ensure that the instructional coach understands those non-negotiables. Parameter 1, shared beliefs and understandings. Parameter 6, data walls and case management meetings. And parameter 14, shared responsibility and accountability. I see the instructional coach as the glue between the system vision and direction and the school's work. So the instructional coach in the Diocese of Wollongong was absolutely instrumental in really understanding what the work is of clarity, what matters most in learning, teaching, leading. Have a listen.
What was the work of bringing those instructional coaches together as a collective and building collective understanding between them?
Well, Karen, do you want to answer that? Because that was basically Karen's role initially, and then James has picked that up. Karen had more of a strategic focus on her work, where we pulled them together so they had that shared understanding of the philosophy. And now James has picked that up and is now sort of more on the ground. Karen, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm happy to, Tracy. Well, I think the first piece was the role, getting clarity around their role. I wasn't in the role at the time. In the office, I was a principal at the time when that first happened, and it had to happen straight away, so they had some idea about what they were doing. And then it was timely this year. I think, Noel, that's what you've done, revisited the role because it evolved so much. So that was a really big lesson, I think, role clarity of whoever this person is, what's the purpose? It's almost like what is it and what isn't it? Because what we found throughout the time, it can be a role that can get a little bit distracted and people can pull on this person to do lots of things. So, but we didn't know that at the start. So it was kind of timely to let it go for a little bit. And then after time to revisit it and now get clarity. Okay, we know now really what this role's about and we know all the things that have occurred that we need to tighten. But really we started with the non-negotiables, parameter 1, 6 and 14, as a way of bringing the instructional coaches together on the same page, because what we found was, while we all engaged in the professional learning with Lynn, people can sometimes then go back to their schools and have a different interpretation of the research. So it's really important to reconnect those key stakeholders. So we started with parameter 6 and we came together as a group of, I think there were 32, Noel weren't there at the time, 32 instructional coaches. And we just revisited Lynn's work. You know, we actually reread chapter 7, pulled out what's the purpose of parameter 6, what's the purpose of a data wall, what's the purpose of the meeting, what are the essential elements, and what would it look like? We almost did, we shared this with Lynn and I didn't even think about it at the time, but it was like a bump it up wall, I think, Lynn, you described it as. So what would it look like if it was highly functioning? Because what we found was that schools were saying, how do I know that we're actually implementing parameter 6 effectively? Like, how would I really know? What does it look like when it's working at its highest level? And so that was really, I think, the purpose of doing that professional learning. It became obvious that people wanted to talk, you know, they wanted to network, they wanted to share. But we also needed to make sure we didn't lose sight of Lynn's research, because that was what made the difference, not if we start like changing it just because it's challenging. So we came together, we produced a bit of a bump it up wall, if you like, on all the non-negotiables in parameter 6 so that schools could answer those questions. What does it look like, you know, when it's working well? And it almost gave them a little bit of a reflection tool. So here am I, you know, our school's here, no judgment. This is just where we're at. And this is now what we've co-constructed as a team, what the next step would be. And so then they could weave it into their school improvement plans. And it just gave them a little bit more, focused direction, I suppose, because they sort of said, oh my God, there's so much, you know, there's so much here. And we can get a little bit bogged down and we just do the things we understand or that are easy. And we tend to avoid the tough stuff, you know, the hard work. So, and it just sort of gave us some common language then. So when we were talking to schools, well, where are you at? And it informed Noel, I suppose, to direct the system support. You know, so these schools are highly functioning. They've said this is where they're at. These are the schools that are struggling. So we can now offer, whether it's, you know, the education officers, or we can get schools together and share their problems of, you know, or challenges of practice around the implementation. So that was the approach. And I think the instructional coaches then felt a little bit a sense of relief. You know, it was kind of like, okay, we are all on the same page now, we get it. And it was interesting how people did say that it is easy to forget all the research after a while. So having that time to come together to reflect was really important. So
I think even last year during COVID, Karen worked really hard to keep the instructional coaches together. They had lots of Zooms. This year we've restructured the way we support our schools, so it's very much focused on their school improvement. And we've formed learning collaboratives, so there's clusters of schools, and the principals work together, the instructional coaches within those clusters work together and collaborate and share. One of the things that we've discovered, it's probably not a good idea to have the assistant principal as the instructional coach, because the assistant principal role is so complex. Sometimes they don't know whether they've got their instructional coach hat on or their assistant principal. So generally our instructional coaches are high quality middle leaders.
Thanks very much for joining me on this Faces Friday. You can see how the role of the instructional coach is so instrumental in creating that common language across the system and ensuring the vision is moving forward of those non-negotiables. So the time we allow schools to have instructional coaches is time well spent. And you can hear during our pandemic how the instructional coaches stayed together, focused on doing the work of supporting all students, all teachers, to teach all students. Thanks again. See you next Friday.